So today we're going to awaken from our sleep, and this is a lesson based on one that is familiar to all of us, I'm sure, Jacob's ladder. And again, I like to kind of revisit these things with new insights or different insights into what they can mean to us. Because these stories, and what's interesting when you start looking up the history of the actual Old Testament story, like in this case, the story of Jacob fleeing from his brother Esau, who was going to kill him. The dates of when this happened historically are extremely difficult to pin down. In fact, they can't pin them down. They don't know when or even if they happened, or if they represent the ancient Hebrews' way of storytelling. And speaking of the Ice Age, there are hundreds and hundreds of stories of floods, worldwide floods. And what some people are thinking now, and I'll tie this into what I'm going to say today, but what some people are thinking now is that any given story of a flood, like Noah, for example, is not necessarily factual in terms of how it's spelled out in the Bible. But it very well may be factual in terms of it actually happening. Because when the Ice Age ended 13,000 years ago, the sea levels rose 400 feet. And so just imagine if that happened today, if the sea level rose 400 feet, we'd lose all of our coasts and major cities on those coasts. The water would be actually pretty close to us. From that perspective. So what people are starting to understand is that the stories may actually be rooted in that fact or in that cataclysm. They don't know. There's several theories about how the flood could occur, but it was the melting of the ice sheets, from the Ice Age. The ice sheet came down all through North America, to the northern states and around New York and all the upper states. There were like 2 miles of ice up there, and there was this cataclysmic flood that occurred. There's all kinds of evidence of it occurring all through the state of Washington, if you're familiar with Dry Falls, that area up there. And it's an area a lot larger than Niagara Falls, but there's no water. And what they think happened is that maybe a meteor or something hit these ice sheets and just instantly melted the water. And there's several ways that they say that could have happened. But the point is, the biblical stories are probably rooted in some event, some experience. Another story too is Atlantis. The story of Atlantis. Whether that was actually true or not. Plato's the one that tells the story of Atlantis, and interestingly enough, the date that he gives goes back 13,000 years, about the time that all happened. So it is, and that's probably about when. I don't know when this particular flood story happened. Nobody can tell, but an event can happen, then it can be passed down through myth and through storytelling and so forth. And that's very likely what happened, that there was actually a flood. And in the case of the end of the Ice Age, it would have been a worldwide flood. Because I always asked, where'd all the water come from? And the Bible explains it as the windows of the heavens opened up and the great deep. And the ancient Hebrew believed that the earth was flat and that beneath it was water and above it was water. There was this great dome, over the top of the firmament. And that's how they explained where the water came from. But there's actually a better explanation than that. And it's neither here nor there, but these stories all contain probably some grain of historical fact. And the story here is one of the most important historical facts that it holds is a transition from the belief in multiple gods and localized gods to omnipresence. God everywhere present. Jacob came from a family that believed that God was localized, that God existed, lived just very in close proximity to where the tribes lived. There was a belief expressed in the Old Testament that the Lord lived in the oaks of Mamre, in trees. When the Israelites left Egypt, the Lord was carried in the Ark of the Covenant. When Moses went up and got the commandments, God was up on the mountain. So it was believed that God was localized, and this idea that God was everywhere was not in existence at that time. But we will find in the Old Testament, and as I'll share here in a moment, cases where that belief did emerge, is expressed. So when we're looking at the Bible, what we are looking at is an evolution of the understanding of God. And you've got to keep that in mind. When if you ask the question, what does the Bible say about God? What's the Old Testament say about God? It says many things about God. There are many gods, many levels of understanding of God expressed in the Old Testament and in the New. There's not just one picture, and that is a false idea that we're given, that there's just one way to look at it, that the Old Testament God was one thing and the New Testament God was another. There are many expressions, and if we understand how the Bible was written, that no writer sat down and wrote it with the idea that he was going to be compiled with a whole bunch of other writers he'd never met and never heard about and never knew. That all happened over a long period of time, and it's a pretty interesting process. It's a rather boring process, but when somebody stands up shaking the Bible saying this is the Word of God, they don't really know what they're talking about. They are taking this ancient text, this series of texts that have written over a very long period of time, combined in ways that no writer ever expected, and put together and then given to us, and we're told that's God talking to us. That's God's voice to us, the way God communicates to us, the Word of God. And that's a false understanding of how it all came about. So when we look at these stories, we look at them somewhat for their historical value, but mainly for what they say to us. That's the real value that we will get out of them. So this story of Jacob, that he kind of tricked his brother into giving up his birthright, Esau, and tricked his father into giving it to him as well. And when Esau found out how he was tricked, he swore he was going to kill his brother. And so Jacob fled. And the problem with his fleeing is he believed that he was going to leave the presence of God. He would no longer be under the protection of God. So that would be a worrisome thing. And I think all of us can relate to that, in that when we're going through some kind of a struggle in our own life, when we're running for our lives, in a sense, we're afraid of something, we don't feel we're in the presence of God. We don't feel that necessarily that is part of the solution that we can avail ourselves to. So what Jacob does is he goes to sleep one night, and he has this dream, and you're all familiar with that, where he sees this ladder and angels are going up and down, and the Lord is standing above that. And he wakes up with the realization that surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. This is the very gate of heaven, or something that he says. And that is an illustration or a major breakthrough, let's say, in spiritual thinking. And it's a breakthrough that all of us can experience and do experience. If you are going through something, or you recall a time when you went through a challenge and you felt very empty, very alone, very separate from your God, and maybe you reached a point, maybe you picked up a book and read a passage in it, or maybe you had a dream, and you remembered that you are not alone, that you are in the presence of God, and you regained your spiritual strength. you found your core again. It's a very important place to be, and that's kind of when I do spiritual counseling, that's kind of what I do or try to help people do, is get back to that spiritual core. Because, sometimes we just feel alone, and we need to be reminded that we're not alone, that there's a power greater than ourselves working in and through us all the time and is working in this situation right now. It's interesting that Jacob had to go to sleep, and that's symbolic of our intellectual mind, our awakened mind, having to go to sleep, to be put down, to be silenced for a time so that we can open up intuitively to that presence. We're using our head to try to figure out all the answers to our problems, and we're so engaged in that we can't do it. That's what happened to Joseph when he had the dream that the angel appeared to him and said, "Don't be afraid to take your wife Mary," and all that. The intellect has to go to sleep sometimes. It has to be put down. And that's the value of meditation. We become still. To become still is to pull back all of our logic mind for a time, trying to figure everything out, to let all that go so that we can intuitively open to our power source. And when that happens, then we feel that surge of strength, and we're able to look at the situation from a new place. Jacob, fleeing in fear for his life, believed that he had left the presence of God, and a dream revealed that he was still in God's presence. So you see what happened to him. He goes to sleep in fear, and he wakes up in strength. And that's the power of letting go. But it's more than just pretending like the problem is not there. It's an actual shift in our perception, a shift in our experience, a shift in our faith, actually. Because before we went to sleep, our faith was in the problem. And we wake up renewed, our faith is in the answer. It is in the solution. Nothing in Jacob's life changed, when he went to sleep. Between the time he went to sleep and he woke up, he still had the problem. But what changed is he rediscovered or refound his center of strength. And that's a very important shift that we all make. And that is the shift in saying that I'm out of the presence of God one moment, and the next moment the answer is coming forth through me now. And I know that. I know that is the truth. The psalmist said it in one of the most beautiful ways, I think, that we see in the Old Testament. Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in Sheol, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there thy hand shall lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me. That's a good affirmation when you're going through something, to recall, to bring back to mind that you are in the presence of God, and God is working through you now, unfolding your life just as it should be, even though you can't see it, even though you don't even feel it. You don't have to feel necessarily the answer. You don't have to feel the solution. Just to feel that power. I don't know how this is going to work out, but I know I'm going to be okay. It's getting to that point, because I am an eternal being. I was listening to a man last night talking about the attainment of immortality, and he was explaining it not as a living in the body forever, because the interviewer asked him this. Do you mean you expect to live in the body forever? He said, no, to attain immortality is a shift in awareness. It's a realization that we are more than this body, that we survive the death of this body, and that we are spiritual beings living in this body for a time. And so if you are immortal, if you grasp your immortality, you lose your fear of death. And that's a pretty big pretty big shift in awareness. If you're going through a problem and you lose your fear of destruction or lose your fear of that problem is going to take you down, you then approach it from a place of power. And that's what we want. We don't want to approach the problem quaking in our boots. We want to approach it from a place of power. And that is in the same sense what this person was talking about, the gaining of immortality. It's a realization, a shift in awareness that this thing is not going to take me down. Here it is, it's here, it's doing its best. But I will not succumb. I will not be destroyed by this. I am greater than this. That which is in me is greater than that which is in the world. And that's kind of what this verse from Psalms does for me. It reminds me that wherever I am, physically and in understanding, I'm in the presence of the Lord, of this larger context of strength and power and intelligence and love and peace and life. So if God, and Jacob goes on to make a covenant with God, which is interesting and very helpful actually, that he has this realization, and he says, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And all of that thou givest me, I will give the 10th to thee. So he's making a covenant with the Lord. If you take care of me, I will give myself basically to you. And if you'll guide me and keep me safe, keep me fed and clothed and all of that, it's a shift in his awareness that God is no longer a thing that can come and go. It's something that is with him all the time. And it's interesting that the Fillmores also did this, and nobody knew about this while they were living. They found this note in their effects when they passed. I don't know if that's large enough for you to be able to read from there, but I'll read it. It says, we, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, husband and wife, hereby dedicate ourselves, our time, our money, and all we have and all we expect to have to the Spirit of Truth, and through it to the Society of Silent Unity. It being understood and agreed that the said Spirit of Truth shall render unto us an equivalent for this dedication in peace of mind, health of body, wisdom, understanding, love, life, and an abundant supply of all things necessary to meet every want, without our making any of these the object of our existence. In the presence of the conscious mind of Christ Jesus, the 7th day of December, A.D. 1892. So they made this covenant. If you take care of us, we'll give our entire life to you. And the Fillmores are not saying we'll give you 10%. They're saying we'll give you all of it. We're dedicating it all. And I've talked about that in the whole idea of tithing. The idea of tithing is not to give just 10% back to God. It is what we are giving is the acknowledgement that all we have is God's, that the life we live is God's. And it's a way to get us back in touch with, this is not me and God, this is not God and me, this is God. And I'm an expression of that. And that to me is the power. I've written about this on many occasions. The power of tithing is not, paying God to like a protectionist or something, mafia type of protection guy that I give God 10% while I'm taken care of. The idea is to shift your awareness. We give because it makes us, hopefully makes us aware that God is our source, our infinite source. And what we're giving is the awareness of God as our source, and that all of it is God, not 10%. And that's, I think, an important shift that we make in our awareness. So as we give, if we think of it in this way, that this is a way to create a continual flow, and that I do give myself to God. My whole life is an expression of God, and I have dedicated my life to God. I mean, if we each say this in our own way, and the tithing is a do this in remembrance of me kind of thing. It's do this in remembrance of that connection. It's something we should do mindfully, not just write a check and throw it in the bag. So you and I can follow Jacob's example by fully committing ourselves to the presence of God. Trust that God is guiding you, supplying all your needs because you're fully relying upon the wisdom and intelligence, the love and the prospering power in which you live and move and have your being. One of the things that we used to do when I was in the Baptist church was have revivals. Have you ever been to a revival, a Baptist revival, a tent revival? I kind of chuckle at it today, but it's really a pretty valuable thing to do when you think about it. Because the whole idea, they would bring in a speaker usually from out of town and just get everybody cranked up, get them all charged up again for their faith in their church and faith in their religion and all of that, faith in Jesus Christ, all that stuff that they would do. But it's a kind of a recharging, a reminder, and I think it's really a good practice for all of us to look at our spiritual journey, look at our spiritual life, and just say, where is it? Where am I with this whole thing? Is this something real for me? Am I truly looking to God for guidance? Am I truly seeing myself in the presence and doing the work of God, and everything that I touch, reminds me of that presence? Are we living from that presence, in other words? Or is it just something we carry around in our back pocket? So I think there's value in a revival, and not necessarily in the kind that I have attended, because I never really wanted to. I basically had to because my parents made me go. But I always got something out of that. It's sort of like when I was baptized. I felt like that was a very important thing. I was immersed in the baptismal pool, and that was a very important thing, at least for that time. It was emotional, and it kind of made me feel like I had done something special. And I think we need that kind of thing once in a while in our own spiritual journey. And in Unity, it's sort of we focus a lot on it's you, the individual, going within and going apart and reestablishing your awareness with God. So it's kind of a lone path, but there is something about that that kind of a revitalization of what are we doing here? What is this spiritual thing? What does it really mean to me? Am I just trying to use spiritual principles to get ahead in life, or am I truly seeking an understanding of who and what I am as a spiritual being? I just think it's an important thing to dig up once in a while and kind of stir up again. So we see God guiding every step that we take, moving through every deal we make. That's bringing it into our daily life, drawing to us everything that we need to take our next successful step. In return, we see all that we have as God's. We see ourselves, our finances, all of our affairs as God's, and we, like Jacob, prosper in beautiful, sometimes unexpected ways. So that's, again, Jacob was, he found something he wasn't looking for, he wasn't expecting, but he had to be open to it. And again, that's the intellect going to sleep, and the value of our taking time to be still and just kind of letting all of this go and reevaluating what is this whole spiritual thing, what is this journey all about, and kind of having a personal revival around that whole thing. All right. Well, thank you for coming out again, and we'll see you again next week.